The email came at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday. Not even the courtesy of a face-to-face conversation after 6 years of loyalty. 6 years of late nights, canceled vacations, and "we're all family here" corporate platitudes. 6 years gone with a template HR message citing cultural fit issues and not embodying team. Player values. I read it 3 times before the reality sank in. Prism Dynamics had just made the biggest mistake of their corporate existence. They didn't know who I really was. None of them did. My name is Victoria Lynn, and I was hired for 2 jobs, not 1. The position they thought they were firing me from? That was just my cover. It started like any other executive headhunting process. A discreet message from a prestigious firm, a series of increasingly exclusive interviews. And finally, a meeting with someone who introduced himself only as Mr. Whitman at a private club downtown. The kind with no sign on the door and membership fees that exceed most people's annual salary. Ms. Lynn, what I'm about to discuss requires absolute confidentiality, Whitman said, sliding a contract across the polished mahogany table. The board of Prism Dynamics has concerns about the company culture. Concerns they can't investigate through normal channels. I skimmed the document. The terms were extraordinary. I'd work at Prism as a mid-level marketing strategist. A perfectly respectable position that utilized my actual skill set and MBA. But my real assignment, known only to 3 board members, was to evaluate the corporate culture. From within, to document everything from executive behavior to employee treatment. To be the board's eyes and ears on the ground. Why me? I asked. Your background in organizational psychology before your MBA, your reputation for discretion, and frankly, you don't have the connections in this industry that would create conflicts of interest. He named a salary that was double market rate. You'll report directly to me. The CEO, the executive team, none of them will know. I signed that afternoon. For 6 years, I was the perfect employee, competent enough to keep my position, but careful never to stand out too much. I attended the happy hours, participated in the team-building retreats, contributed to projects, all while meticulously documenting the reality beneath Prism's glossy exterior. The toxic leadership, the discrimination, the ethical corners cut, the whispered warnings to new hires about which executives to avoid being alone with. I filed my reports weekly, secure encrypted files sent to a dedicated server, accessible only to my board contacts. 6 years of evidence, until yesterday, when Derek Lansing, the newly appointed chief marketing officer, decided I wasn't dynamic enough for his vision. Derek, who had been with the company all of 3 months and spent most of that time rearranging office, seating to optimize energy flow and hitting on the new design interns. And now here I was, staring at a termination email sent after business hours. No warning. No performance improvement plan. Just corporate cowardice thinly disguised as strategic restructuring. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I'd used only twice before. "It's Victoria," I said when Whitman answered. "They just terminated me." The silence lasted 3 beats too long. "That wasn't authorized." "I know. The board meeting is Monday. Be there. 9 a.m. You'll present your final report personally." I smiled for the first time since reading the email. I'll be ready. The weekend gave me time to compile 6 years of notes into an airtight presentation. Every incident, every policy violation, every toxic pattern, substantiated with dates, times, witnesses, and documentation. Not the sanitized quarterly summaries I'd been providing, the raw, unfiltered truth. Monday morning. I arrived at Prism's gleaming headquarters dressed not in my usual business casual, but in a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than my monthly rent. The security guard at the front desk did a double take. "Ms. Lynn," I thought. "The board is expecting me," I interrupted. Sliding across the visitor badge Whitman had messengered to my apartment. The executive floor was eerily quiet when I stepped off the elevator. I was directed to the main conference room where 14 people sat around a massive table. 11 board members, CEO James Morgan, CFO Heather Watts, and CMO Derek Lansing, whose complexion had taken on the pallor of day-old oatmeal. Ms. Lynn, the board chair, Eleanor Winters, nodded to me. Please, have a seat. Morgan leaned forward. What is the meaning of this? This employee was terminated for cause on Friday. By whom? Winters asked mildly. Derek cleared his throat. I authorized the termination based on performance issues and… Interesting. Winters cut him off. Since Ms. Lynn doesn't report to you, she never has. The confusion on the executive team's faces would have been comical under different circumstances. Ms. Lynn, Winters continued, has been conducting a comprehensive cultural assessment of PRISM dynamics for the past 6 years. At the board's request, today, she'll be presenting her findings. The blood drained from Morgan's face. Derek looked like he might be sick. For the next 3 hours, I walked the board through a carefully constructed narrative of systemic issues, management failures, and policy violations. I named names, I provided evidence, I connected dots that formed damning patterns. 6 years of watching and waiting distilled into 180 devastating minutes. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute. This is preposterous, Morgan finally spluttered. A spy? You planted a spy in my company? Our company, Winters corrected. And yes, we did. After the sexual harassment settlements that were hidden from the board in 2017. We felt it prudent. You can't possibly believe. We verified her documentation independently. Another board member interjected, all of it. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I was savoring every second, every incredulous look, every bead of sweat forming on Derek's forehead. Winters dismissed the executive team, asking them to wait in their respective offices while the board deliberated. As they filed out, Morgan shot me a look of such pure hatred that I mentally added another 0 to the settlement I'd be requesting for wrongful termination. 3 hours later, Whitman escorted me back to the conference room. Only Winters and 4 other board members remained. The board has reached several decisions. Winters began without preamble. James Morgan, Heather Watts, and Derek Lansing have been terminated, effective immediately. We'll be bringing in interim executives while conducting a search for permanent replacements. I nodded, waiting for the part that concerned me. As for you, Ms. Lynn, she continued, your contract with us concluded with today's presentation. However, we'd like to offer you a new position. I raised an eyebrow. Chief Cultural Officer, a new role, reporting directly to the board. You've spent 6 years identifying what's wrong with PRISM. We'd like you to have the authority to fix it. The irony wasn't lost on me. Fired on Friday as expendable, offered an executive position on Monday. I'll need full autonomy, I said, budget approval, direct input on executive hires. Of course. And compensation commensurate with the other C-suite positions. Winters almost smiled. The offer letter already reflects that. I took the folder she slid across the table, but didn't open it. I'll have my attorney review it. We expected nothing less. 2 weeks later, I walked into PRISM headquarters with a new title and a corner office. The first item on my agenda, a company-wide town hall. Standing at the podium, facing hundreds of curious, anxious faces, I felt a strange sense of vindication mixed with responsibility. For those who don't know me, I'm Victoria Lynn, PRISM's new Chief Cultural Officer. Some of you knew me as a marketing strategist. The truth is more complicated. I paused, looking out at my former peers. For 6 years, I've been documenting every aspect of PRISM's culture, the good, the bad, and the inexcusable. That documentation has led to significant leadership changes, as you've all noticed. It will lead to more changes in the coming months. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I'm not here to make enemies or settle scores. I'm here because this company has incredible potential that's been squandered by toxic leadership. That ends today. I outlined my vision for a transformed PRISM, transparent, accountable, genuinely inclusive. Not the performative corporate values plastered on walls, but structural changes with teeth. My door is open to anyone who has experienced harassment, discrimination, or retaliation. Your stories will be heard, and more importantly, they'll be acted upon. As I concluded and stepped away from the podium, the applause started slowly, then built. Not the obligatory corporate clapping, but something real, something hopeful. Later that afternoon, as I settled into my new office, my assistant announced my first appointment of the day. "Send them in," I said, straightening the nameplate on my desk. Samantha Chen from accounting entered, clutching a folder and looking nervous. "Ms. Lin, I don't know if you remember me, but—" "The Christmas party, 2019, I said. Derek Lansing cornered you by the elevators. HR dismissed your complaint because there were no witnesses." Her eyes widened. "You saw that?" "I documented it, along with 7 similar incidents involving Lansing." She sank into the chair across from me. "No one believed me." "I believed you," I said. "And now I'm in a position to do something about it." "Tell me everything, Samantha. This time, I promise it won't be ignored." That was the first of dozens of similar conversations over the coming weeks. Employees who'd been silenced, sidelined, or gaslit coming forward now that someone was finally listening. Meanwhile, I systematically dismantled the old guard's power structures. The high-potential program that mysteriously only included people who looked like the executive team, rebuilt from scratch with transparent criteria. The unwritten rules about which teams got resources and visibility, documented and reversed. The retaliatory performance reviews, expunged from personnel files. Not everyone was happy, of course. The beneficiaries of the old system resisted, first passively, then openly. Middle managers who'd modeled themselves after Morgan's leadership style found themselves increasingly isolated as their tactics became liabilities rather than paths to promotion. 3 months into my tenure, the anonymous messages started. First in company chat channels, then escalating to emails sent from temporary accounts. "Corporate spy. Who do you think you are? Just wait." I forwarded each one to security without comment. I'd anticipated resistance, expected it, even. What I hadn't expected was how quickly the company would divide into factions, those embracing the new prism and those desperately clinging to the old ways. The crisis point came during the annual leadership retreat. Traditionally a booze-soaked weekend at a luxury resort, where the real decisions happened in hot tubs and at poker tables. I'd redesigned it as a genuine strategic planning session at a conference center, with facilitators and actual work. On the second night, I returned to my hotel room to find my laptop missing and my files scattered across the floor. A note sat on the pillow. Some things should stay buried. Instead of reporting it immediately, I did something the old Victoria would never have done. I called an emergency session right there, at midnight, with all 40 department heads and senior managers. When they'd assembled in the main conference room, bleary-eyed and confused, I stood at the front, arms crossed. My hotel room was broken into tonight, my laptop stolen, my files searched. I let that sink in. Whoever did it left a threatening note. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. "I don't know which of you is responsible, but I know this. I have copies of everything, every file, every report, every piece of evidence I gathered over 6 years. Breaking into my room accomplished nothing except proving how desperately some of you fear accountability." I looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. "This ends now. If you cannot commit to the prism we're building, there's the door. No retaliation. No black marks, a generous severance package and references. Walk away clean." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Andrea Walsh, a senior director who'd been with the company for 15 years, stood up. "I can't do this," she said quietly. I can't work in a company where everything I've achieved is suddenly wrong." She walked out. After another tense minute, 7 more followed. To the remaining 32, I said, "Thank you for staying. Now the real work begins." The next morning, my laptop appeared outside my door with a typed apology note. I never found out which of the departing leaders had taken it, and I didn't pursue it. Sometimes, knowing when to let go is as important as knowing when to fight. By the 6-month mark, Prism's transformation was making industry news. From toxic to trailblazing, inside Prism Dynamics' cultural revolution. Read one headline. Our recruitment numbers surged. Employees who'd left during the Morgan era started reaching out about returning. On the anniversary of my firing and subsequent promotion, Eleanor Winters requested a private lunch. I've been on this board for 20 years, she told me over our entrees. I've never seen a company change this dramatically this quickly. We had good people all along, I replied. They just needed the barriers removed. She nodded thoughtfully. The quarterly numbers are impressive. Turns out psychological safety is good for the bottom line. Who knew? Winters smiled slightly. The board is unanimously pleased with your performance. But I sensed something coming. But nothing. We'd like to extend your contract for another 3 years, with an expanded scope. The board feels that having someone with your observational skills in the C-suite is invaluable. I considered this. You want me to keep being your spy, only now with a fancier title. I want you to keep being our conscience, she corrected. There's a difference. Later that evening, as I worked late in my office, there was a knock at my door. It was Maya Jones, a junior designer who'd started at Prism around the same time I had. 6 years ago. Do you have a minute? She asked. Of course. I gestured to the chair across from me. Maya sat visibly nervous. I'm not sure how to say this, so I'll just say it. I know what you were doing all those years. I kept my expression neutral. What do you mean? The documenting? The watching? I saw you once, in the server room, uploading files at 2 a.m. when everyone else had gone home after the product launch party. I saw the files, just glimpses, but enough. Reports about executive behavior, meeting notes, incident documentation. I hadn't expected this, not after all this time. Why didn't you say anything? She shrugged. At first, I thought maybe you were stealing data to sell to competitors. But then I noticed patterns. You were always in the background when the worst behavior happened. Always watching when Morgan or Lansing were being particularly awful. You never seemed surprised by any of it, just patient. And you kept my secret, I observed. I figured you had a good reason. She smiled slightly. I was right. I studied her for a moment. Sharp, observant, ethical enough to not expose me, but strategic enough to reveal her knowledge now, when it could benefit her. Maya, how would you feel about a special project? Something requiring discretion and careful observation? Her eyes lit up. Is this what I think it is? Prism is changing, I said. But we need to make sure it doesn't slide back into old patterns when no one's watching. I could use another set of eyes. You want me to be your Victoria, she said, catching on immediately. Something like that, but with more support than I had. She leaned forward. When do I start? And that's how it began again. The watching, the documenting, the waiting. Only this time, I wasn't alone. This time, I was building a network of accountability throughout the company. People who understood that real change required vigilance. 1 year to the day after my firing, I called Derek Lansing. He'd landed at a smaller firm across town after leaving Prism. But rumors suggested he wasn't thriving. Victoria, he answered, his voice tight. What an unexpected surprise. I'm calling with a job offer, I said without preamble. His laugh was harsh. You must be joking. Not at all. Prism is launching a new initiative focused on restorative practices in corporate environments. We're looking for case studies. People willing to publicly acknowledge past mistakes, undergo training, and demonstrate genuine change. You want to use me as a guinea pig, parade me around as your success story. I want to offer you a path back, Derek, a difficult, humbling one that requires real work. But a path nonetheless. The silence stretched for so long I thought he'd hung up. Why would you do that? He finally asked. After what I did to you. This isn't about you and me, I replied. It's about changing industry norms. Making real accountability possible without permanent exile. You'd be the first test case. Another long pause. I'll think about it. Take your time, I said. The offer stands. 3 days later, he accepted. 6 months after that, Derek stood before a packed auditorium at an industry conference, describing his journey from toxic leader to accountability advocate. The audience was skeptical at first, but his rawness, his willingness to name his specific failures without excuses, gradually won them over. Watching from the wings, I felt an emotion I hadn't expected. Hope. Not just for Prism, but for the possibility that toxic workplace cultures everywhere could be transformed, if enough. People were willing to do the uncomfortable work. After his speech, Derek found me backstage. That was harder than I expected, he admitted. It's supposed to be hard, I replied. That's how we know it's working. He nodded slowly. You know, I hated you for a long time after everything went down at Prism. I know. But you could have ruined me permanently. Instead, you offered a way back. Not many people would have done that. I shrugged. Not many people spend 6 years undercover in a toxic workplace, either. I don't exactly follow the conventional playbook. For the first time since I'd known him, Derek laughed genuinely. No, you certainly don't. 2 years after my firing and elevation, Prism Dynamics was featured in a major business magazine as a case study in cultural transformation. The article detailed our innovative approaches to accountability, transparency, and inclusion, approaches now being adopted by other companies in our industry and beyond. The morning it was published, I arrived at my office to find a small package on my desk. Inside was a framed copy of my termination email from 2 years earlier, along with a note in Eleanor Winters' handwriting. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's creating something so much better that the past becomes irrelevant. EW. I hung it on my wall as a reminder. That afternoon, I met with my growing network of observers, 15 employees at various levels throughout the company who served as my eyes and ears, documenting continued progress and flagging backslides. Maya had grown into a skilled leader of this covert team, developing protocols and training materials I wished I'd had during my 6 years undercover. The latest reports show continued improvement in most departments, she informed me. Though we're seeing some concerning patterns in the new acquisitions, I nodded. That's to be expected. Cultural integration is always the hardest part. Should we increase surveillance there? I considered this. No, let's try something different. Full transparency. Tell them exactly what we're looking for and why. Give them the tools to monitor themselves. Maya looked skeptical. You think that will work? I think it's time to find out if what we've built can stand on its own, without secrets. The pilot program in our newly acquired subsidiaries proved surprisingly effective. When people understood the standards and knew they would be genuinely held accountable, not through covert observation, but through regular, transparent reviews, most rose to the challenge. By year 3, I rarely needed my network of observers. The systems we'd put in place had taken root. The culture had shifted so dramatically that new hires sometimes couldn't believe the stories about old Prism. At the 5-year mark after my firing, I submitted my resignation. Not because the work was done, cultural maintenance is never done, but because I was ready for a new challenge. The board tried to convince me to stay, offering increasingly generous compensation packages. But I had already accepted a new position, heading a nonprofit focused on workplace reform across industries, funded in part by a substantial grant from Prism's foundation. On my last day, the entire company gathered for a farewell reception. As I looked out at hundreds of faces, some who had been there through the entire transformation, others who knew Prism only as it was now, I felt a profound sense of completion. 5 years ago, I stood before many of you and explained that I had spent 6 years documenting everything wrong. With this company, I began. Today, I want to tell you what I've spent the last 5 years documenting. Everything right. I gestured to the leather-bound volumes displayed on pedestals around the reception hall. Annual reports detailing Prism's cultural metrics, employee testimonials, and industry impact. These books tell the story of what's possible when we refuse to accept toxic workplaces as inevitable. When we insist on accountability and refuse to look away from uncomfortable truths. When we believe that companies can be both profitable and humane. I raised my glass. To Prism, not perfect, but always striving to be better. The room echoed with the sound of clinking glasses and genuine applause. Later, as the reception wound down, Eleanor Winters found me by the windows overlooking the city. So, will your new organization also be planting undercover operatives in toxic companies? She asked, with a hint of amusement. I smiled. Different approach. We're creating resources for internal whistleblowers, providing legal support, and working with investors to make cultural audits standard practice before major funding rounds. Evolution, not revolution. Something like that. She studied me for a moment. You know, when Whitman first suggested hiring you for our little experiment, I was skeptical. I thought you'd either compromise yourself within months or become so bitter you'd be useless too. Us. Underestimating women has always been corporate America's blind spot, I replied mildly. Winters actually laughed at that. Indeed it has. She extended her hand. It's been a privilege, Victoria. Likewise, Eleanor. As I packed up my office for the final time, Maya stopped by. So this is really it, she said, leaning against the door frame. This chapter, yes. I sealed another box. But the work continues. Will you miss it? I considered the question. Parts of it, the people, mainly, not the politics. She nodded. The new CCO starts Monday. She's been asking a lot of questions about your methodologies. Share what's helpful, improve on the rest. That's it? No special instructions? No secret files to pass along? I smiled. Maya, you haven't needed my instructions for years. Trust your judgment. As I picked up the last box, I took a final look around the office that had been mine since that pivotal board meeting, 5 years earlier. So much had changed since that Friday afternoon when a dismissive email had triggered the cascade. That transformed not just my career, but an entire company culture. You know, Maya said thoughtfully, they really should have checked who they were firing before they hit send. Their mistake, I replied, our revolution? That night, as I left Prism headquarters for the last time, I spotted a familiar figure in the lobby. Derek Lansing, now heading our restorative practices program, was giving a tour to executives from another company. And this wall, he was saying, gesturing to a display of framed articles and awards, documents our transformation journey, starting with what we call the Friday firing, when we accidentally terminated the board's undercover cultural evaluator. The visiting executives laughed, clearly thinking it was a joke. Derek caught my eye across the lobby and gave me a small nod of acknowledgement. I nodded back. Some lessons need to be learned the hard way. Some revolutions start with a single misguided email. And sometimes, the person you underestimate the most is exactly the person you should have feared all along. My name is Victoria Lynn, and 6 years ago, they fired me for not being a team player. Little did they know, I was playing a much longer game, one that would ultimately change not just Prism dynamics, but how an entire industry thinks about workplace culture. The email that was meant to end my career instead launched a revolution. And I was just getting started.